Welcome students to this special session on understanding power. I have with me in the studio someone who has specialized in sociological theories, Dr. Tribhuvan Kapoor. Well, he will tell you in details the theories of power, what power is and everything. But a little while from now, I'll tell you a brief overview of what power is. Let's understand the concept first, and then we go on to understanding how different sociological theorists have tried to explain the concept of power. Well, the word power is probably not new to any one of us. We have been hearing of power, we have been exercising power in different situations, and we have been victims of power in several situations, right? Which means that at some point of time we have tried to assert ourselves and get things or get work done from other people. Okay, that is when we say we have exercised power. At other times we have subjected ourselves to the will of others despite a lot of resistance from our inner self. Sometimes we don't want to do something, but we have to do it because the person who is telling us to do is senior to us, is stronger than us, has more resources than us, or has some kind of a personality that we cannot ignore, or we think that if we ignore the person, it will work out to be at our disadvantage. If the person becomes unhappy, we will suffer. There are different reasons why we succumb to power of others. Well, it's all this and a little more that we will be talking about. But before we go on to all that, let us see what the concept of power is. As I told you, we have done things that we have not wanted to do, right? So we have subjected ourselves to the power of others. Power then, if we understand at a very broad level, is the ability of an individual or group of individuals to get others to do what one wants them to do, even if others resist it. So even if we don't want to do something and we do it, it is because we realize the power of others, of someone else. Now, obviously, we have wondered at several times in life why some people have power, why other people do not have power. What is the basis of power? After all, what should we do? We all want to be powerful. We all want to exercise our control over others, right? So, what is the basis of power? Why is it that some people have power and other people do not have power in some situations? In another situation, other people would have power, and the people who have been powerful in one situation may not have the same kind of power in another situation. So let us understand what the basis of power is. Why do some people wield power? Well, one reason is physical might and strength. Remember the goons on the road? Many people succumb to what they say, what they want to do is because they have a lot of physical might, they have strength, we know that they are stronger than us. So we succumb. That is the basis of power. The other basis of power is unequal distribution of resources. Some people, for instance, are wealthy, others are not. Some people have access to more information than others. So if you know more than someone else in a situation, obviously you exercise greater power. Others will listen to you, right? The third reason why some people are able to exercise power or hold power in their fist is because of fear, or because of rational calculation of advantage, or because of loyalty. You see, sometimes we feel threatened by another person and we succumb to the pressure. At other times we feel we know the other person is wrong, we know that the basis of power, the other person is not even strong, but we still agree or we still do what he or she wants us to do because we feel that if we do not, we will suffer a disadvantage, right? Or we feel very loyal to a person or a group of individuals or an institution and we agree, we succumb. Mainly these are the factors. As we go along, I will be able to tell you the other factors and the other bases of power. But in common parlance, in a very general sense, these are the reasons or these are the bases on which people assume power. Now let us see what the related concepts of power are. When we talk of power, we talk of several other concepts, right? We talk of prestige, right? Prestige is, you feel the person who has prestige, you look up to him or her, right? The person has a greater advantage, people want to emulate, he has a higher status in society, right? Power does not essentially give prestige, right? Think of the dons of the underworld. They have a lot of power, so to say, right? But prestige? No. Okay. The other concept related with power is influence. Now, power is coercive in nature, in the sense that the underlying statement is, if you don't do this, you will bear the consequences, right? So it is coercive, it is forceful, it forces you to do something, so you do it even against your wishes. Influence is persuasive, right? Now a very simple example will clarify the whole thing. Think of your teacher in school, or your principal in school, or the headmaster or the headmistress in school. If you would make a mistake, he or she would probably tell you once. If you repeat it, and if you continue to repeat it several times, you could have been shouted at or beaten or punished in some way or the other, right? This is coercive power. The mother, on the other hand, would probably keep persuading you, keep telling you not to do this, not to do this, not to do this, not to do this several times. This is persuasion. Persuasion is, you repeatedly tell an individual to do something, but you do not apply sanctions if a person does not do what you want him to do, or him or her to do. The next concept that is often confused with power is dominance. Now, while power ascribes or power comes from particular situations or particular circumstances, dominance is a trait in personality. Right? Certain people are dominant by nature. It is a psychological construct. Another concept that is related with power very, very closely and several times confused is authority. Now, when power gets legitimized, say because of social position, it becomes authority. If it does not get legitimized by a social position or through some other means, it remains power. Right? The policeman has power or he has authority? The policeman has the authority. The school principal has the authority. Right? A roadside goon has power. Right? Because the power of the goon is not legitimized through any institution or through any socially accepted way, socially accepted means. This is the difference between power and authority. Authority is a subject that has been discussed at length by Weber, and I will tell you in detail after a while. Now, having done this, I understand that some of you would have acquired a basic understanding of the whole concept of power. Let us see the critical points related with power. First is, power involves asymmetry in relationship. This means that among two people or among two or more people among whom power is exercised, or there is a play of power, it's one person or a group of people who will have power while the other will not have power. So this is not a symmetrical relationship. A symmetrical relationship would have been if both the parties had power. Right? But in itself, we saw the definition of power, and it said it is the potential or the capacity to make others do what you want them to do despite resistance from them, which in a way underlies the idea that two ideas. One, that power in itself has to be in relation to someone else. So there have to be two parties involved. Right? And among the two parties, one party would have power, the other would not have power. So the relationship in a power situation is asymmetrical. Now, power attaches not simply to the structure and position of an individual in a formal setup, but also in non-structural interactions. Thirdly, structural power is most evident when behavior is chiefly determined by position. Right? By structural power is meant power that comes from definite social institutions or definite structures in society. For instance, a bureaucratic setup is a structure. Right? So the power is most evident when it becomes determined or defined, or when it comes with a position in a structural arrangement. Having done that, let us see, there are two main conceptions of power that have been identified in the writings of sociologists. One is that power presupposes a view of social or political relations as competitive and inherently conflict-based. Right? So we assume that the relationship between two people among whom there is a play of power is competitive, it is conflict-based. This is the view that was put forward by Max Weber. Of course, we will learn about this in greater detail after a while. The second is that power is a collective capacity or achievement. Power then becomes a collective resource at the disposal of groups or collectivities. This is the view which was proposed by Talcott Parsons, who is known for his functional paradigm. There is a difference. You see, while Weber said that the relationship among two people or two groups of individuals between whom power is exercised is competitive, there is conflict, one person wants to exercise power, the other resists it, so there is a kind of a conflict. The functional perspective proposed by Talcott Parsons, on the other hand, says that power is collective capacity or achievement. You see, a group of people have the power to do something, to make a significant transformation, to make a significant change. This is the second conception of power. Of course, within these two streams, there are many sociologists who have dealt with this concept of power. Tribhuvan, at this stage, would you like to intervene and explain to them?
Well, I could say a few words and then give it back to you.
Okay.
Viewers, as Neeta has been pointing out, power is a relational thing. It is to do with at least two people. But normally it would not be two people alone, because each of these people would have further ramifications, further networks, and therefore it's actually theoretically a dyadic thing. But otherwise, as Parsons has pointed out, it's lodged in collectivities. My interest at this stage, after Neeta has so pointed out the basic factors of power, would be how does power manifest in its movement? And I think that if we take certain forms of certain modes of production, certain forms of social formation, I think this concept would become a little clearer. And therefore I would like to take up the Marxian paradigm and try to indicate the relationship of power and revolution. Because revolution is one of the things in which power is manifest very greatly, and new structures, new institutions, new social formations, different kind of configurations in society take place. Now the Marxian paradigm is well known for its sequential movement forward, and though there have been observations to its contrary in the recent past, notably those of the postmodernists including Michel Foucault, nevertheless it's very useful for delineating how power moves, because power, as a matter of fact, only seems to belong to a person or to a collectivity. And as we notice even in democratic societies, let alone the communist societies, power is a value neutral kind of object, and it is something which is cornered or garnered by people, by groups of people, to go on and formulate their own goals and fulfill these goals. Now in Marx we have first of all primitive communism, and here also in primitive communism they are the people who control the goods, and there is an unequal distribution of goods, and therefore goods become a source of power, and in due course of time those people who do not have the goods and are always being exploited and pushed around, coerced, as Nita was pointing out, to do what they would perhaps resist in doing, these people gather together, two groups are formed, and the one which has got more power, and power lies in numbers also, it is not simply an abstract entity, but power lies in a lot of the coercive power of numbers is very great, and so forming a dialectical relationship, an antagonistic relationship at that stage leads to that of feudalism. Now here the power is with the feudal lords, and the serfs are being made to do just about whatever the feudal lords want them to do, and here again an antagonism develops between the people who are using power and those who are being at the receiving end of that utility of power and being forced to do agricultural work, household work, guarding the hacienda, and all sorts of errands. And in some cases the feudal lords also treated the slaves as people who would bring up who would produce some offspring of a different sort, and therefore there was an antagonism, and power shifted towards the people who were unhappy or discontent, and the feudal lords were displaced from their powerful position, and a new era came along, and that was capitalism. Now here we are seeing in the two stages that power doesn't belong to anyone, it's nobody's private property. It's a kind of force which Michel Foucault points out, it's a kind of force which you cannot exactly define or pin down, but it acts through people and through collectivities. And this becomes most apparent in capitalism, where the state is a neutral party and the capitalists are exploiting the proletariat. And the capitalists themselves make up the state, and therefore the state is not against the capitalists, but the capitalists control the state, and therefore they have the power over the proletariat to suck off, to siphon off the surplus value of the goods and distribute the profits in such a way that the proletariat or the workers get very little relative to what the capitalist does. And this is because he owns the means of production, and ownership of means of production, a material thing, provides him the ability to control the workers and siphon off surplus profits. But this is in itself an alienating process. The workers themselves feel as if they are powerless, they are helpless, they are not being able to make any decisions, they are not being able to put their point of view forward. Instead they have to come, and in some movies like Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, some people spend hours just tightening screws on conveyor belts, and by the end of it they are completely exhausted. The work has been completely meaningless, and they are only working because they have to keep themselves and their families from starving. Now power here once again does not belong to anyone. It is on the side of the capitalists. But there is always a contest for power, as Neeta was also pointing out, that we all want to be powerful, we all want to put our point of view forward, we want to have it our way, and we think that we are, the last word in everything. But when the capitalists group together, this takes on a very sinister kind of situation in which vast groups of people, vast collectivities of people are being taken for granted, and they are being exploited, and therefore they are alienated, and when they are alienated they start grouping together and form one class called the proletariat, and the other polarizes into the capitalists. There is antagonism, and there is a violent play of power in which a revolution occurs. The capitalists are thrown out and the proletariat take over the means of production. However, this leads hopefully to a new situation which is called socialism, where power will now not be captured by one particular class or the other, but it would move about in such a way in which everyone could do what they wanted to do. Now this is utopian socialism, and this is a paradigm. These things have not happened, generally speaking. These were forecast even before there was a revolution in any country, and there was brief uprisings in France, for example. So I think Michael Foucault's concept, which is one in which power is a nebulous quantity or a nebulous quality which seems to belong to one group or the other, but as such, if we look for power, we can only see power in its actions, what has happened. Otherwise, power is not visible. It's not like an institution. If you look at an institution, it would be difficult to imagine that there is power in it. But there are power relations within institutions and between institutions. So at one end there are people who are trying to be powerful, who are exerting their power, who are exerting their authority. On the other hand, there are relationships between groups and other groups. There are relationships of power between institutions and other institutions, organizations and other organizations, and power is usually talked of in terms of political power, but as a matter of fact, what one relates power to is the kind of power it is. For instance, there is the power of the godman. It's a spiritual power. The godman is able to control thousands if not millions of people with a particular kind of philosophy and a particular kind of influence and persuasion, which gives his clientele a feeling that they cannot do anything, they are helpless without that person. So I think these are some of the areas which I would like to touch upon before handing it back to Neeta for her further comments.
Yeah, he provided you an overview of the Marxian perspective on power. I will explain to you now some of the other conceptions of power that have been proposed by different sociologists. Let's begin with Max Weber. Right? Now, Max Weber distinguished between power and domination. He said power is that which is realized through the actions of an individual. Okay, it is that power is the potential that is realized through the action in which an individual engages. This potential, how does this potential come? Weber said that this potential comes from fortuitous circumstances, or these come from structurally defined opportunities. These are distinguished. Now these are circumstances or situations through which people or a group of people derive power. Okay. Domination, on the other hand, presumes the presence of a master. So there is a clearly defined category of masters who will be obeyed, and others, the masses, who will obey the master. This is the difference between power and domination. Now, why do people agree to be dominated? What is the basis of domination? We learnt about the basis of power. We just discussed that Weber gave his own basis on which power is built, and we said fortuitous circumstances, we said structurally defined opportunities. The basis of domination is that the master is able to convince the masses that what he or she is doing is in the interest of the masses. Right? So if you are convinced, if there is a master who convinces you to do something against your wishes, you will do. That is his domination. The other way through which dominance is exercised is by virtue of the authority of the master. Master says this has to be done, and it is done. This is the authority of the master through which he or she is able to dominate. Now, Weber distinguished between three kinds of authority. You probably know he talked of traditional authority, he talked of rational legal authority, and he talked of charismatic authority. Traditional authority, he said, derives or operates in undifferentiated, lesser segmented, more egalitarian societies. Say in a family, the family head. It's traditional authority. Okay? The father may be in a patrilineal society. The father may be very, very old, not able to do anything, just lying in one corner of the house, maybe paralyzed also. Still, he continues to have some authority on his children. Right? This is traditional authority. The second kind of authority that Weber spoke about was rational legal authority, which I told you operates in a bureaucratic setup. Authority which comes from position. Okay? The third is charismatic authority, which Tribhuvan just talked to you about, and he said the authority of a godman. Okay? Someone whom people regard as their religious leader. They say this person has some kind of charisma. In Hindi they say karishma. Okay? And the authority derives from that special qualities that are inherent in an individual. That is charismatic authority. Now, another sociologist who talked about power was Lucas. He talked of power and human agency, and he said that in any situation, no matter how dependent an individual is, there is also always some degree of autonomy that is available, and the option to choose, the option to make use of this autonomy is power. Okay? So in any situation, there are some 2 or 3 or 4 or more options that are available from which an individual can choose. Right? Now think of a person whose company is coming to a close, okay, who is laying off and has to lay off people. There is no option. Okay, the company has to close down and people are laid off. The person who is laying off others has no power. Right? Because according to Lucas, he or she does not have any other option, has no option but to lay off people. Imagine another businessman or a businesswoman who is laying off someone because he or she finds him or her incompetent. Okay? Or thinks someone else can join and be a bigger asset. Then such a person has the power because he or she had different options from which he or she chose to lay off a particular individual. So this individual had power. Power then, in very, very simple terms, in Stephen Lucas' conception, is the alternative to act differently. There's another sociologist who talked about power in some detail, and he talked about power as dependency. He was Anthony Giddens. Okay? Giddens distinguished between two kinds of power. Power in a broad sense and power in a narrow sense. Power in a broad sense is the ability to bring about change in the course of action through intervention. Okay? So an individual is able to make some intervention and bring about a change. That is power in a broad sense. Right? Think of a principal in his school. Something goes wrong, there is a policy decision to be taken in the interest of the students, and it is done. He intervenes, makes a policy, takes a decision, it is done. Power in a broad sense. Power in a narrow sense is relational in the sense that the outcome depends upon the contribution of others also, upon the will of others also. If the same principal goes in a bigger meeting of all the principals of the country, now whatever decision he or she takes cannot be executed immediately or cannot even be accepted immediately, because the acceptance or the rejection of the decision that he or she takes depends on the input or the opinion or the viewpoint of the other principals who are present. So this is power in a narrow sense. We have talked about power from the point of view of Max Weber, Karl Marx, Stephen Lucas, Anthony Giddens, but one person remains, one sociologist remains, who made very interesting contribution to the study of power and which you will be able to relate with immediately. He is Robert Michels, who talked of the iron law of oligarchy. Now before we go on to understanding what iron law of oligarchy is, let's understand what oligarchy is. Okay? Oligarchy is control or governance or rule by few, by select individuals. That's oligarchy. Right? You can distinguish oligarchy from democracy on the one hand, which is people's rule, and from monarchy on the other, which is the rule by an individual, by a monarch, a single individual. Robert Michels was a German sociologist and economist, and he proposed the iron law of oligarchy with respect to Social Democratic Party in Germany. He was analyzing the role of political leaders in shaping the demands and aspirations and mobilizing support for party initiatives. This is the background against which he proposed the iron law of oligarchy. And I will read out the iron law of oligarchy now and then explain to you what it means. The iron law of oligarchy states that it is the organizations which give birth to the domination of the elected over the electors, of mandataries over mandators, of delegates over delegators, which means that, you see, what do we do in a democracy? We elect our representatives, and these representatives then begin to dominate us, the electors. As they come to rule over us, they begin to dominate us. So they assume greater significance and they assume more importance than the people who have actually elected them. This is what he said meant when he proposed the iron law of oligarchy, and he said that as political party grows and it becomes more bureaucratic, it becomes dominated by two kinds of people. One are the officials who are committed to the internal organization of the party and the goals of the party rather than social change. What these officials seek to do is maintain the status quo of the party, pursue the organizational goals, and they are not concerned what effect this would have. How this would bring about social change, in what direction the social change will go, is not something that they care for. The political party, when it becomes bureaucratic, also gets dominated by middle class intellectuals. These middle class intellectuals are smaller groups of people who pursue personal objectives which are usually different from party ranks and party goals. don't we get to see several times that, you know, a very egalitarian body, a body which has very set, defined goals, which talks of people's participation and there is a lot of people's involvement, gradually becomes bureaucratic, gradually becomes centered on specific issues and gets centered in the hands of few individuals. This is the iron law of oligarchy. And Michels had stated earlier that all parties, several democracy in itself over a period of time gives rise to not one but several oligarchies. Right? Now how do these oligarchies assume importance? Why do these oligarchies come up? Why do some people actually get to control the resources and the means and be the decision makers and dominate the electors? Because these people derive benefit or derive advantage out of the incompetencies of the masses on whom they rule or for whom they make policies. The masses of people are incompetent, they do not know the rules of the game, they do not know what to do, they look up to their leaders for direction and these leaders are able to manipulate. It is not so much the oppressive conditions that hurt people, it is generally the awareness of those oppressive conditions that hurt people. Okay? Michels also said that there is embouchement within the parties. This means that the working class leaders become middle class, they enroll themselves in the party or in another bigger group and then become less committed to common social goals and they succumb, as they acquire power, they succumb to the power of the seniors above them. Of course, Michel was criticized on several counts and it was said that this does not always happen. Michels in turn proposed the concept of radical principled leadership, which means more disciplined leadership that would not succumb to the power and pressure of those who are already in power. Tribhuvan?
Thank you, Neeta. I think that you have made a very clear presentation on the iron law of oligarchy and also Michel's overall approach to the problem. And as you were talking, I had the feeling that this iron law of oligarchy operates across political systems, as was implicit in part of your presentation, so that whether the system is that of a dictatorship or it is a democracy or whether it is a communist regime, the iron law of oligarchy seems to say that there will always be a cluster of people who will be in the vicinity of power and will be able to tap it for their own purposes and make people do and behave the way that they want them to do. Now, in a democracy, power is the goal of the political parties, and one political party will gather it to a greater extent than another and then influence and persuade the electorate in the direction that it wants to go. However, there is a cabinet of ministers, some 5, 7, 10, 15 or so people who are the people who are mainly involved in putting their vision across for the betterment of society and convincing the people that this is the best way to go, whatever the policy may be, whether it's a 20-point program or it's a 5-point program or it's a pulse polio program, whether it is for health or whether it's for economy or whether it is for cultural purposes. It seems that there is a small caucus which seems to decide everything, no matter what the system is. However, in democracy, power after a certain period of time, whether it is 4 years like in the USA and whether it is 5 years like it is in India, at that particular time there has to be a further legitimization of authority, because after that particular period of time an election is called, and once again it is decided who is going to be aligned to the power. I am using deliberately the words aligned to the power because I don't believe that anyone has the power. Otherwise, why would it go away? Why would it go away with age? Why would it go away with different environmental circumstances, developments in international relations? After all, democracy nurtures a particular leader for a particular period of time, and then power leaves that person, leaves that caucus, goes to another person. It's almost like an element, an intangible kind of thing, which settles on certain people and enables them to do certain things, and then just like an ascetic or some sort of sannyasi, it moves away and aligns itself to another group. In dictatorship, however, the nature of power is slightly different than that of a democracy, because here the caucus and the dictator have no specific time span allotted to them as to how long they will carry on. They may promise that they will shift the system in 5 years, they will shift the system in 2 years, but it never seems to happen. And a dictator is defined specifically by the situation that he or she would like to stay in power, to be associated with power until the very end of their days. In a communist society, once again, power is with a certain person. No, it's not with a certain person. Again, there is a gang of 5 or a gang of 7 of people who are operating the system and saying what is good for the people, including how much of economic goods to produce. In a planned economy like the Soviet Union was, or China is now, it is the government and government departments which decide how much of shoes to produce, how much of wheat to produce, how many clothes to produce, and how many sizes of clothes to produce, how much to export. All this is taken. It's a centralized decision-making system. So I was struck when Neeta was talking about the iron law of oligarchy, how this iron law of oligarchy operates in all social systems and is not confined to any particular caucus of people or any gang of people. It shifts from one to the other, and all through history power has been there, but the people who operate this power have come and have gone. So power is permanent in that sense, is permanently in the air, whereas the people who exercise this power come and go. I think I'll pass it on to.
Thank you, Tribhuvan. You've already explained power in its many dimensions. I have nothing fresh to add now, except that I want to tell you how in a world system power derives, inheres, and how it operates. We understood Marxian analysis from Tribhuvan when he said that society is divided into classes: those who own the means of production and those who do not own the means of production and serve those who own the means of production. And there are two classes, the proletariat and the bourgeois. Now, in a globalizing world where people are talking of a global village, a seamless world, a borderless world, in which they are saying national governments have no greater role to play than function as transmission belts for flow of foreign investments, it's also critical to understand how power then plays at the international level. Well, at the international level also, the neo-Marxists say that the world is divided into the capitalists and the others. Those who are affluent and who hold the means of production still. So it's not earlier Marx had talked about specific societies. The same model applies to the world society. Wallerstein had proposed the whole concept of world system, where he said you should analyze the world as a full social system. The unit of analysis is the world itself. So if there is a world society, if we agree with Wallerstein and say that there is a world society, then in this world society there is an exercise of power. The capitalist countries who have a bigger hold over the means of production have greater power. It is these countries that dictate, so to say, the terms and conditions of trade, the terms and conditions of production, distribution, exchange and consumption, and the other countries or the other people in different nations subject themselves to the culture and the dictates and the imperialism of those who own these means of production, or the capitalist countries. Well, I think by now you would have understood what we tried to do in this whole session was to explain to you the concept of power both from a theoretical perspective and from a practical perspective, and try and link the theory with the operation of power with specific examples. I hope you have been able to understand the whole concept of power now more clearly through this discussion. Thank you.